Welcome to this episode of Consider It Blacklit. I am Kim Singleton, your host, and for those of you tuning in for the first time, Consider It Blacklit highlights films, television programs, and stage plays featuring African Americans up front and behind the scenes. We also discuss social issues as it relates to some of these programs and how they may or may not impact our communities. So thank you for tuning in, and we hope you continue to tune in each week. Today, it is my pleasure to have a cultural anthropologist, a visual artist, and a filmmaker, Sabiyha Prince. Welcome, Sabiyha.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yes, today, one of the things we're going to talk about is her documentary called Diminished Returns, The Wealth Gap in Washington, D.C. Let's take a look at the trailer.
But as we stand on the steps of the John A. Wilson building, right here in the capital of the United States, there's some dark clouds that linger above. The clouds that hang over our Capitol building, clouds that hang over the White House and the Supreme Court, bastions of freedom and justice and democracy. The clouds remind us of our history.
The wealth of the United States is criminal wealth. It is the wealth of stolen land and stolen labor.
Historically, there have been lots of interesting pathways to achieving and accumulating wealth. So much of it is through resources that were gained, earned, and sometimes stolen by forced labor, wage theft.
Systems of slavery and segregation. At the core of those systems are the transfers of wealth through labor from African Americans to white Americans.
The family home was up here. Yeah, it's about right where I'm standing right now. This is where my family's house was, looking out over the hill. They forced my family off of this land based on our race.
When you look at what has been lost simply on the basis of your skin color, it's somewhat comforting for me because you realize I'm not crazy. It's the system that's crazy. I am not without value. It's the system that does not understand how to value me.
There has to be this reckoning and acknowledging of our wealth origin and who has it, who doesn't, and how was it gotten. And in reckoning, now you can start getting into repair.
How reparation plays into a conversation about wealth and poverty within the African community is this. We have tried everything to close that so-called racial wealth gap.
There's something called intergenerational wealth, and that's something that by and large Black folk in this country really don't have.
We call it reparations, but I want the land that was unjustly taken from us.
It's not a thing of the distant past for us. It is ever present. We can go back as far as slavery, to Jim Crow, to present day forms of discrimination, to land very firmly on what it will take to close the racial wealth gap.
We are making the case for reparations here in Washington, D.C., starting from this very moment.
Yes, very interesting. I am particularly drawn to this documentary because I grew up in Washington, D.C. when it was called Chocolate City. And it was a great time to be a Black person in D.C. at that time. Not that it didn't have issues, but it was wonderful. But with gentrification, that landscape has changed. So I'm glad this documentary came around so we can spotlight some of the challenges. But before we dig into the documentary, tell our audience about you. Like, what is your background and how did you become a filmmaker?
Well, thank you so much again for having me. It's a pleasure to be able to talk with you. And I would say my career took a bit of a circuitous route. The bulk of my professional life has been spent as a university professor. I was in the Department of Anthropology at American University for over 10 years. I started out very young as an artist and got my undergraduate degree in photographic composition and audiovisual production. But the truth of the matter is, my path to becoming a filmmaker was rooted in community activism and community organizing. It's through the relationships that I forged with people that I began to dip my finger or my toe back into communications through organizing around a community called Berry Farm.
Oh,
The,
wow.
the relationships that I formed there, I appeared in a documentary called, I think it was called Go-Go City, that was directed by Samuel George, who later became a good friend and my co-director for the Berry Farm film. So it was actually through the organizing work that I tapped back into my creative part, my audiovisual production career, and I've hit the ground running ever since.
Oh, that's awesome. That's amazing. So tell our audience what inspired you to do this particular documentary film that's based on the wealth gap between Blacks and whites in Washington, D.C. How did that all start?
Well, a few things. I was commissioned to make the film by the funder, the If Foundation. They asked me to make it. They did so because they saw the Berry Farm film, and it just so happens that all of this work speaks to my work as a scholar and as a cultural anthropologist. So it really grows out of the work that I've done, all my research, my writing, including my advocacy. When I was asked to make the film, I just hit the ground running in terms of the topics that I wanted to cover. It was very clear for me. So I immediately came up with the structure of the film, which is to look at the origins or the background or the context of the present. That's a part of my work as an anthropologist. You know, we look at culture. Culture is situated in historical, undoings, if you will, and it's situated within the political and the economic structure of our society. So I just thought of, telling that story and speaking to my skills as a person that develops curricula to reach people at all different levels. When you're teaching at the college level, you have to reach students where they are, and they are at many different levels. They have many different experiences. And documentary filmmaking is just a powerful tool to also reach people wherever they may be, without the jargon, without all the barriers or the gates that keep people away. You can tell important stories, complicated stories, but you can share them in a way that's absorbable and understandable for folks. So that's kind of like my journey, tapping into my myriad skills that I have as a storyteller, as a scholar, as an artist. And film is that perfect tool for bringing all those things together and just mushing them all up and seeing where it takes me.
Right, right. I really admire people like you who can do documentaries because you basically go in the past and you bring the truth to the forefront. So talk to us about, what was the research process like? Because I know it's not easy. Every time I think about documentaries, I think about a research paper, so I'm like, oh, okay, wait a minute. I don't know if I can do that or I have the attention span to do that. But talk to us about what your research process was like.
Sure. Well, the important thing to hammer home is that this is not a singular effort. You're working with a team of folks. So when you see these fantastic documentaries, people like Ken Burns and Stanley George and Ava DuVernay and all of them, their names rise to the top. But the fact of the matter is they're working with a team of folks that are helping them to tell their story. Particularly, you have the editors, you have the cinematographers, and yes, I had two fantastic researchers working with me. So my process was, again, doing the outline, coming up with the questions that you're going to ask. I think that's the foundation of the documentary because that's the data that you're going to get back. So all the things that the people are saying, all the poignant one-liners that come out, it's all rooted in the question that you ask them. So that's at the foundation of it. And sometimes you have to ask questions in different ways to get the data that you want. And then I have my list of topics that I want to be explored more deeply, that we need the archival footage and the archival photographs for. Two names, Sarah Schoenfeld and Sharon Pandana. Those were two researchers that we had on board. Sarah is a well-known public historian in Washington, D.C. You can name a school to her, and she will tell you the history of it, when it was segregated and or desegregated, who went there. These are the kind of folks that I have working with me, and we work collectively to make sure that we have a product that we want to share and that we're proud to share.
Hmm. That's amazing. Yeah, I like people like that where you can really go to them and they can give you the history about so many things. Yeah, yeah. So you had a lot of people in the documentary who were really added to the story in terms of talking about the wealth gap, as well as individual stories that really kind of touched me because, it's so sad to see how you work so hard for something and it's taken away from you. But how did you go about selecting who would be participating in the documentary?
Um, Actually, the same answer came through my relationships. I am no spring chicken. I've been around. I've had numerous different careers. I've been involved in the arts. I worked on Capitol Hill. I was in the anti-apartheid movement. I did environmental justice campaigns with Greenpeace. Again, I was a college professor, born and raised here. So I tapped into my network. My network is extensive. It includes people that, yeah, maybe I know them well, or maybe I don't know them well. Maybe I just met them. Maybe I was on a panel with them, like I was with Tony Lewis Jr. We were on a panel at Martha's Table. Just kind of really connected with him, made sure I had his phone number as any good researcher, journalist, artist, get your contact list together. And when I was asked to do this film, he was one of the first people I thought about because of his work around mass incarceration, which I think is so vital to include in this conversation. Black men and women being locked up for long periods of time, the impacts on their families, the impacts on their communities, and connecting that with structure, with economics. So, I called him the nail tech / entrepreneur, who's one of the people profiled. She does these. I immediately thought of her because we have fantastic conversations when they're sitting there. It's kind of like being at the barbershop, right? You're getting your nails done and you're talking about stuff, you're sharing and you're learning. And she said something to me that just stayed with me. She said, I want my family to become owners. We have been renters for a long period of time, and there's nothing wrong with renting. Owning is not for everyone. There's no stigma there. But when she said that, and when I was asked to make this film, I immediately said, I have to have her.
Mm.
The final vignette is Judge Lisa Butler, who happens to be a very good friend of mine. We went to high school together. So my network is extensive, and that's how I wrote my 2 books. I wrote a book on gentrification in Harlem, and I wrote a book on gentrification in DC. And all through what we call in anthropology, snowball sampling. You meet one person, you ask them, who else do you know? Who else do you know? And before you know it, you have a cadre of people to interview.
Wow. And make sure you say the name of your book, both of your books.
Sure. The first one is called Constructing Belonging, and that was about the Black middle class in Central and West Harlem during the very early phases of gentrification there. So I gathered those data in the early 90s. And then my most recent book is African Americans and Gentrification in Washington, D.C., and it's based on a series of oral histories, and our primary way of gathering data in cultural anthropology is through participant observation. You're hanging out with people, you're being with them when they're doing the regular things that they do every day, and you're really getting a feeling of what their lives are like, and that's a great way to depict culture, if you will.
Oh, well, thank you for sharing. Because I know some of the audience members who are watching is like, oh, she mentioned the book. Because when you talked about gentrification in Harlem, I live in Harlem, so I would be interested in that book. And I
Oh,
was
yeah.
there during that gentrification process.
Oh, yeah. I'd love to sit down and talk with you about that.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. So, as you were doing the documentary, tell us some of the things that you learned. I mean, you have a vast background and you're very knowledgeable, but tell us some of the things that you learned and also highlight some of the things that you may have been surprised to learn that you didn't know before.
Thank you for that, because I'm always on my learning journey. And I got to say, growing up in DC, you probably know we don't get to learn our local history. I mean, you're going to get it from your family or your elders or what have you, but there's so much history here that we didn't learn in school. And so I would say one of the big takeaways for me was the situation with Chevy Chase in Northwest Washington, D.C., and the fact that there were huge populations of African Americans, both renters and homeowners, making lives for themselves post enslavement. I had no idea about that, Kim. They didn't teach us about it. Similarly with Berry Farm, which I learned, from my first film about the history of that and just how long Black folks have been struggling just for a place, just to have some stability, to have work, to be able to raise their families. And in this case, simply because they were African American, they were displaced. The last family was displaced in 1931, and we had a descendant, Jocelyn Julian, who appears in the documentary with this very powerful plea for reparations as she talks about her family and the horrific impacts of being displaced on her family. Because what we see is that people sometimes get on cycles of displacement. They're displaced from one area, they go to another, they could be displaced from that. And it really is the beginning of cycles of destabilization that have very damaging effects in families for generations.
Wow, wow. I'm glad you brought that up because growing up in Washington, D.C., and I mentioned that it was Chocolate City, and I said it was a great time to grow up there because it was a solid middle class. We weren't struggling. It was full of our culture. And, of course, there were some areas that weren't as prosperous as others. But I just have memories of growing up in Washington, D.C. A lot of people had jobs in the government. A lot of people own homes, so just growing up, I never really thought about, well, how did we get there? You know what I'm saying? As a child, you're not thinking that way.
Right.
But when you really think about it was Chocolate City, it was a solid middle class. They had their businesses. How did we get here? And I think your documentary kind of touches on that and brings awareness to the journey that we have and how our journey is disrupted because of you talk about eminent domain and people getting their property taken. It sort of makes you angry a little bit because it's like, everybody's saying everything's equal, it's this, it's that, but we had all those things. If you take it away and force us to start from scratch, where do you think that's going to end up? So,
Exactly.
so I say all that to say, why do you think it's so important right now to bring that up and talk about that?
Well, so many reasons. I mean, we all are looking at the news and we're all disturbed by the things that we're seeing. Our country is going under some radical change right now. And it's changed, but at the same time, there's a level of consistency and there's a logic of white supremacy that we're also seeing being acted out right now. And the reason why I say consistency is because, a lot of us are students of history and we understand that our ancestors had to deal with authoritarianism. That is what we had to deal with. The laws did not respect our rights. Anything could happen to us. We could be disappeared. We could be sexually assaulted. We could be trafficked. We could be lynched. We could be put in prison for long periods of time through unfair processes, through juries that were biased, et cetera. So when you see where we are right now, it almost seems like we're coming full circle. So I think a lot of African American people recognize this for what it is. That being said, the information is invaluable because we have to be reality based. If we're going to get through this, if we're going to cope, if we're going to come up with solutions, we certainly can't do that by being gaslit or acting upon information that is inadequate or that are lies. And that's another part of our struggle, always having to push back, always having to revise the record, revise the history, not to serve our egos, not to serve oppressive tactics or strategies, but to set the record straight and to tell the truth. I don't see how we're going to move forward if we are not based in reality and based in fact. As they call it, being woke, which I don't drive while sleeping. I don't operate machinery while sleeping. I don't do anything while sleeping except sleep. So I accept the label of being woke. I embrace it. And that's what we have to be moving forward. We have to understand how we got here. It does not provide excuses for anything. We don't need excuses. We need to understand the tremendous harm that has been done to us as a people. And fine, we have been labeled resilient. Fantastic. I'll take that as well. That does not have anything to do with the fact that the harm has been done. Labor has been exploited. Trillions of dollars in wealth have been accumulated off the backs of our ancestors. And I will continue to shout it from the mountaintops. It's wrong, and it needs to be repaired. As other groups that have experienced oppression, they have received reparations. There is no doubt that 250 plus years of unpaid labor, followed by racist terror, followed by Jim Crow, followed by redlining and everything else you can think of, requires answers. The
Right.
facts, the receipts.
I hear you. I totally agree. Preach, preach, sister, preach. That's all I have to say.
Let me adjust my collar.
Another thing I like about the documentary, and that I'm amazed when documentaries like dig up all these old pictures and these images. How difficult was it to find these old images, and was it difficult to get them licensed for the documentary?
There were some that were difficult at the end. By and large, again, I have my list. These are the things that I want. These are the things that we need. Passed it on to our researchers. One focused on stills and the other focused on moving footage, documentary footage. And they just got to work. And that's also what they got paid to do. So they're not volunteers, but they're good at what they do. You are only as good as your team. And I praise my team to the high heavens because they were absolutely fantastic. So, we have great archival resources here in Washington. We have the Library of Congress, and everything, of course, is online. You have Moreland Spingarn at Howard University. You have the regular DC Public Library. And again, there were some things that we inserted, but we did not have the permission. Sarah went to extra lengths to try to find some of these things. And the ones that we couldn't find, that we did due diligence, go ahead and put them on in there, because we know that we did due diligence. And we even spoke with some librarians, and they were like, oh, well, not sure, can't necessarily find that. And that's why you put that little disclaimer in the end, just to kind of cover your what.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
those are only a few. I mean, I would say maybe there were one or two that we couldn't track down. Everything else, not a problem. And a lot of it's free as well.
Well, it was very well done. Very well done.
Thank
So,
you.
what would you want your viewers who see this documentary to take away with them?
I think the same thing I was saying in my little rant is just understanding the strength and the beauty of our struggle, of our families, how much they've given, not only to us, but to the city of Washington, D.C. My grandmother scrubbed floors. The extent to which she did work outside the home, but she spent a lot of time inside the home as well, raising children. She went out when my grandfather was not aware of it to earn some extra pennies so they could buy a home. And my grandfather was a stock boy, if you will, grown man. These people are at the economic foundation of our city. We need to understand that. We need to pay them homage, that what they've done to contribute to the city that we currently live in. So let's respect that. And then let's also understand the barriers that they reached, the glass ceilings, the myriad oppressive systems that prevented them from breaking through to those occupations that earn the highest amounts in Washington, D.C. We have a very racialized division of labor in our city. Certain jobs are for certain people. The people that make the most money are white people, white shoe law firms, I guess tech folks and all the like. And, who's ever making tons of money, which is a smaller number of us. And so people need to understand that, how structures work in our lives and how we're all a part of the structure.
Mm, mm. Very good. Very interesting information. So we're getting close to the end of the program, but I do want you to talk about some of the other things you do. It could be the other films, your art, etc. Just share.
Oh gosh. Well, filmmaking is my passion. I do a few things, but I do want to make more films. I am a visual artist. That's my happy place. That's my meditative place. I go up into my studio, which is right here in my home. This is one of my pieces right here. And I just like to paint. I may be intuitive, just throwing stuff on the canvas. Maybe I'm basing it on a photograph I took. Maybe someone's commissioned something for me. That's my happy spot. But I do want to make more films. I have treatments that I've done that I'm looking for funding for. One called Zoned for Injustice, about zoning in Northeast Washington and how that has created environmental injustice and poor health impacts for African Americans in those areas. I have an animated treatment that I wrote that celebrates activism in DC. There's a lot of ideas that I have ruminating in this mind. And as long as my brain is functioning, I don't know how many years I have, but as long as it's functioning, I want to get these ideas down. So I do a lot of jotting. I do a lot of ideas and storing them into categories and buckets so that I can pull from them in the future and be able to put a story together. Because ultimately, I'd like to make an actual short feature film and not just documentaries. So I have a lot of plans for myself. There's not enough time in the day.
Well, I look forward to your future projects. So, tell our audience if they wanted to follow you on social media or keep up to date with what you're doing, how could they do that?
Sure. Well, I have a website, www.sabiyyaprince.com. I do have a news segment on there, which I need to do better at updating, but I put what's going on with me there. I'm also on Instagram, and my handle there is anthro_arts, and that's spelled ARTZ. So I update that pretty regularly. You will see what I'm up to there and what work I'm doing, what paintings and digital collages that I'm making, I tend to post there when they're finished. I'm also on LinkedIn under my name, and I'm not on Facebook any longer, but I'm still on Threads.
Okay, okay. Well, thank you. Audience, that's our time for today. I'd like to thank Sabiyha Prince for joining me and talking about her film and her other projects. And until next time, everyone, consider yourself Blacklit. Thank you.